Hello everyone, my name is Yihun Stith. I am a senior columnist for the Cornell Daily Sun. We are joined today by Dr. Norman Finkelstein. Dr. Finkelstein is a graduate of Binghamton University and earned his doctorate from Princeton University. Over 3 decades, he has held faculty positions at Brooklyn College, Hunter College, New York University, and DePaul University. Furthermore, Dr. Finkelstein has been a prolific writer with seminal works such as The Holocaust Industry and Gaza, an Inquest into Martyrdom. Dr. Finkelstein, welcome back to Cornell. You've arrived at a very turbulent time for the campus and the broader world, and we appreciate you taking the time to speak with the Cornell Daily Sun. I want to start with Israel and Palestine. At the beginning of Trump's term, Israel and Hamas signed a ceasefire deal with 3 progressive phases. Since then, I would say international press on Gaza has lessened. However, you still say it's a slow-motion genocide. Can you expand upon that and discuss your reactions to the ceasefire?
I don't want to be too attached to any particular expression. I called it a slow-motion genocide because that was the opinion of Amnesty International, which probably a few weeks after the so-called ceasefire, it's not really a ceasefire, the whole purpose of it was to pull Gaza below the radar, which it succeeded in doing. But we have to acknowledge the most barbaric phase of the genocide passed. It's not of the magnitude that was occurring before the ceasefire agreement. The point I would stress is there's not the slightest grounds to believe that the Israelis have given up on their objective. Their objective was clear from day one. The objective was to empty out Gaza, that this was going to be the final solution to the Gaza question. I do not believe that their objective was genocide, but I do believe the modus operandi, the way to achieve their objective of cleansing Gaza, was they were using genocidal means. If you look at the definition of genocide, it's intentional targeting of a national or racial group for destruction. If you look at the international law on the subject, and I have studied it, there are individuals in various of the genocide cases who say that in order for a situation to be described as genocide, it doesn't necessarily have to be the objective. It could be the means to achieve another objective. And I think that's what happened in Gaza, and there's no reason to believe, none, that Israel has in any way modified its objective. All the talk about increasing humanitarian aid to Gaza and reconstruction of Gaza, that's never going to happen. I said it in day one, and I see no reason. It's now 6 months since the ceasefire agreement. I see no reason to modify it. There won't be any reconstruction of Gaza until the people are gone.
What do you think is needed on the side of the ceasefire for any movement to happen, for the Palestinian people to have hopes that, there is some rebuilding at some point?
I don't believe there's anything that will satisfy Israel short of, for once and for all, solving the Gaza question. I don't believe there's any external pressure that will be brought to bear. The main concern of President Trump was to bring the genocide below the radar because he still wants what he came to call the deal of the century with the Saudis. And there was no possibility that the Saudis could sign such a deal in the midst of a barbaric genocide. So Trump's goal was simply to bring the conflict below the radar so he could sign the deal with the Saudis, which is probably still going to happen.
So I want to go on to recent events. The events of February 28th, the bombing of Tehran and the subsequent killing of its supreme leader Khomeini have rippled through the world. We're now 2 months into the war with Iran. How do you think this will impact the Middle East? And I mean, you said you have no faith that, this will change the situation in Palestine. Do you think the Iran war will have no impact on Palestinian self-determination?
It won't have any impact on Palestinian self-determination. Look, President Trump is a very eccentric figure, and it's a very personalized presidency. Personalized in the sense that it's very difficult to discern his personal motives from what might be called the national interest. Most presidents in office, of course, there's always an egotistical element. there's always a personalized element. But most presidents have acted with cognizance that they're the executives of the U.S. government. They have certain responsibilities to the quote-unquote national interest, and they acquit themselves with a reasonable, you could say, level of responsibility. Responsibility, again, within the context of the national interest as they understand it. From the national interest, it sort of lurks like background music, but so much of it is so personalized. My guess is it'll pass, and then we will resume the status quo ante. I was discussing with some of my friends over breakfast. I think they'll probably achieved, the fancy term is called a modus vivendi, which means a way of living together in the Straits of the Hormuz, quietly, again, below the radar. Something will work out between the Americans and the Iranians to allow passage of vessels in the Straits of Hormuz, but Trump will never publicly admit to a defeat. And so it'll probably drag on for 3 years. Hey, you know what? World wars last 3 and 4 years, and that brings a lot to a halt in the world when you have a world war, and countries survive, the system survives. I think it'll probably just drag on, gradually recede. It's already receded from the headlines. If you look at the morning papers, they're talking about the Supreme Court decision and all sorts of other things. And Iran is already on the bottom half of the front page, as we used to call it in my day, when Cornell was a newspaper as well. We called it below the fold. You fold the newspaper, and you had the top and the bottom. If you look at the newspapers now, Iran has already fallen below the fold. And I think once it falls below the fold and Trump doesn't feel his ego is at stake and his grandeur, and he won't be taunted with this colossal debacle he created, they'll work out something. And there will not be an agreement. I think there seems to be consensus. There's no way to bring the two together. And once he's gone, even if it's a J.D. Vance, because J.D. Vance can claim he was against the war, they'll work out something. And they'll probably resemble the Obama JCPOA. It'll be more or less the same thing. And the whole thing will be forgotten.
So long term, I want to ask, many people, and you mentioned it yourself, the sea wave of change in our relationship to Israel, specifically American public opinion. Some argue that if the Iran war continues to go on and Israel continues to act in the way it does, that at some point the U.S. alliance may end with Israel. Do you see that being a possibility?
I think politics is many levels. First, you have to mobilize, if you want to achieve a goal, you have to mobilize public opinion. Okay, or you have to change public opinion. That can be a very difficult process. It happened in this case. Unfortunately, it took a genocide to change public opinion, and it's changed dramatically. No question about it, in ways which are unimaginable even 2 years ago. I was watching a CNN presentation of the current public opinion polls, and they looked at every possible cohort, below 50, Republican, Democrat, and every possible, as they call it, permutation and combination. And at every level, it changed as much as in 2 years, from 2024 to now. The shifts were on the order of 40 percentage points. I mean, it's just really breathtaking. So you could say there's now, at the level of public opinion, we've reached critical mass. It's true. But then you have to translate the public opinion into a political force. As Bernie Sanders pointed out during his presidential campaigns, on issues like Medicare for All, jobs program, and so forth, going on, or even taxing the rich. you have 80% of the American people supporting it. He would say, all of my planks in my program are supported by 80% of the American people. Does that mean it's been enacted? There is a huge chasm. Once you've won the battle for public opinion, there's another huge chasm between public opinion and translating it into a political force. So I think one step has been won. It's a very significant step. However, I think the second step, I was listening yesterday to an interview between Marjorie Taylor Greene and Tucker Carlson before I came up here. And she pointed out that she put forth last year a bill cutting all U.S. aid to Israel in the House of Representatives. And already public opinion was changing then. It's after the Gaza genocide. Do you know how many votes she got? 6. 6. We are still pretty far from the level of translating public opinion into a political force.
Can I ask, why do you think that is? Some people mention, the likes of money interest groups
Yeah, of
like
course.
AIPAC.
Hey, it's the same reason we don't have Medicare for all. There's a lobby that holds it back. But where I do think there has been, let's not call it a change, but I think there's a problem developing. And the problem is the far right has basically, I know this may be an unfair description, but I will use it. And the far right has hijacked the Palestine question. I do believe if somebody like Tucker Carlson runs for president, as of now, doesn't seem it, but it's not totally outside possibility, he will run with the Israel issue. If you listen to him now, it's nonstop. Everything is Israel and the Jews. Now, he'll say, not all Jews, like in Shakespeare's Hamlet, he thinks he doth protest too much. That's not all Jews, but you get the idea. Well, maybe there are a couple of exceptions. He will run with it. If you look at the shifts in public opinion with the Nazis in the 1930s, up until 1929, the Nazi Party was never able to get more than 5% of the vote in Germany. The Jew, even though it obviously had a huge Jewish element, their platform, never appealed to the German people. 5%. What happened? The Great Depression. And with the Great Depression, the quote-unquote National Socialist Party seemed to have a program, and that's when its popularity soared. The claim that the popularity of the Nazis was due to its anti-Semitic platform is not true. I mean, we know it. The data has been studied by 10,000 scholars. It was the economy. Now, it is true that the anti-Jewish flank of the Nazi platform, it had some appeal. One of the better historians, I have to admit, I've not studied it in 20 years. It was what the historian Ian Kershaw, he said it was an add-on to the whole platform, but it wasn't the decisive one. So with that in mind, my guess is Tucker Carlson, Marjorie Taylor Greene, that ilk, they run on an America First platform. That will be their platform, America First. And they have, so to speak, proven themselves as being loyal first to America. And as Marjorie Taylor Greene now says, the other two parties, they're America last, okay? So these two people run on America First. So it's a very easy add-on to America First. And then there are those who are working for a foreign power, which according to people like Tucker Carlson meaning Israel, want to destroy the United States. That's what he says. Part of their agenda is to destroy the United States. So he'll say, these supporters of Israel, they want an ethnic state for Israel, But here they want to bring in all these immigrants to destroy the U.S. That's their goal, he says, to destroy the U.S. So as you can see, America First and an anti-Semitic platform, they easily meld. And I think that could win, actually. I think that platform could win now. I think it's an ominous development where we are right now. At the level of translating public opinion to a progressive platform, I think we're still far away. 6 votes she got for cutting aid. And that's not even putting pressure on Israel to do the right thing, to obey international law, just cutting aid. Actually, I don't think we're that far away. I could easily imagine an America First platform, and just, as your generation calls it, just adjacent to it, there's the anti-Semitic platform. In the next 4 years, I can't say. But those things can very rapidly gain momentum. After 1929, the Great Depression, the Nazis, the next election, they went to 18% of the vote, from 5 to 18. And then very rapidly, by 1933, we're only talking about 4 years later, they got 44% of the vote, and then they formed an alliance with a party which is hardly distinguishable from them, and they won the election. It was very fast. So I would say, in total, we would still need a precipitous fall in the economy. If that happens, and I don't think that's beyond possibility, even if I were an economist, you shouldn't trust me because nobody can predict those sorts of things. But it's certainly within the realm of possibility of global depression. If you have that, then I think things can very rapidly go off the rails.
Talking about claims of anti-Semitism, I want to talk about college campuses. We're here at Cornell right now. Following Gaza solidarity encampments in the spring of 2024, we saw the Trump administration take aim at elite universities across the nation for claims of anti-Semitism. For example, here at Cornell, President Koltnikov signed a $60 million deal with Trump to drop our anti-Semitism cases. What are your reactions to universities caving to Trump's demands?
Well, first of all, I think we have to get the chronology right. It did not begin with Trump. Now they're trying to pretend, the Democratic Party is trying to pretend the troubles began with Trump. That's just factually wrong. Who crushed all the encampments? Was that under Trump? That was spring 2024. Trump wasn't in power. That was all the Biden administration. The problems began under the Biden administration. There is no evidence whatsoever of any significant, even insignificant, frankly, anti-Semitism on the college campuses. There just isn't. If you ask, do non-Jews carry around prejudices against Jews as being pushy, as being clannish, all the standard? Of course. And guess what? They carry around prejudices about African Americans, about women, about everybody. But that's not a political problem. And as you know, probably will take centuries to extirpate those forms of prejudice. They're so deeply rooted, not just in our conscious, our unconscious. It's such a complicated mechanism, the mind. And you can't, there were these idiots during what I would call the era of high wokeness about 4 or 5 years ago. It's already practically forgotten, by the way, that whole era. Who talks now about Robin DiAngelo or Ibram X. Kendi? It's all gone. But they had this notion, which you probably heard because you were among that age cohort, of interrupting racism. What could that possibly mean? Like an emergency brake on the subway, you pull it to stop race. It's so stupid. So I'm not saying there weren't stereotypes and prejudices about Jews. Of course there were. Did they have any practical impact? Practically zero. In my day, what did you talk about when you talk about bigotry? Bigotry, racism, it was very concrete. Admissions to college, buying a home in a certain neighborhood. renting an apartment, a law firm that doesn't want to hire you because you're of a particular ethnicity or nationality. These are very concrete things. Nobody was trying to probe your mind. Think whatever the F you want to think. I just want that job. I earned it. Or I have a right to attend this university. You can't have quotas preventing me. That's what it meant. By that level, does any law firm discriminate now against Jews? Yes, they do, in favor of them. That's just a fact. Does any university discriminate against Jews? Yes, in favor of them. Because of what's, you might call the unconscious or conscious racism. You go to an interview, which when you apply to Cornell, you have to have an interview. So if the person sitting opposite you is black, that person has to prove he's not dumb. That the burden is on him to prove he's not dumb. If it's a Jew sitting opposite you, the burden of proof is he has to prove he's stupid. Because the assumption is he's smart. He has to prove he's stupid. If he doesn't prove he's stupid, the default is he's smart. So all of those sorts of, you carry it in you. You carry it in you. And I'm not going to claim I'm immune from it, So in all those sorts of ways, of course it tilts in favor of Jews. Of course it does, since half the time the interviewer is Jewish. In terms of real anti-Semitism, there was none. I read through the several universities, Columbia, Harvard. They put out these very exhaustive reports, to the point of real tedium. The Harvard report was about 312 pages, my memory is. And I read it. I didn't see anything. So I thought, all right, Norm, you don't want to see anything, read it again. You're not being objective. I read it a second time, and I read it very thoroughly. There was nothing, 312 pages. It's, as the podcaster Brianna Joy Gray would say, it's a nothing burger. There's nothing there. And in fact, about 2 weeks ago, and maybe less, maybe 10 days ago, you can check it, the president of Harvard, Alan Garber, G-A-R-B-E-R, he gave an interview, and you know what he said? He said, quote, a great deal, that's his terms, a great deal of what was called anti-Semitism was actually criticism of Israel. He said that. So then you ask yourself an obvious question. If a great deal of it had nothing to do with anti-Semitism, how did they put out a 312-page report? What did they fill it with? Nothing. You know what the essence of the report was? The essence of the report was the Israeli Jewish students, they feel excluded. They feel ostracized. That was the essence, and so the recommendation was Harvard has to be inclusive. Harvard has to be pluralistic. To which I say, I'm not going to be inclusive of child killers. And I don't feel any obligation to do so. But anti-Semitism? No. I mean, the examples they gave, they said at the encampment at Harvard, some person had a map of Israel-Palestine which excluded Israel. Oh, shock. I'm totally shocked. Can you show me one Israeli who ever includes Palestine in their map? The map that Netanyahu held up around 6 months ago, there was no Palestine in that map. So if that's your proof, and then they said there was some person who had a cartoon of Garber, the president, and he's Jewish, with horns, devil's horns. They said that's anti-Semitic. Well, why is it anti-Semitic? They're depicting him as a devil. Well, it's an anti-Semitic trope, that idiotic word. An anti-Semitic trope. What are you talking about? There's nothing there. You'd have to be crazy to flaunt anti-Semitism at these universities when you know 1/4 of the faculty is Jewish, and then there are 10,000 anti-Semitism organizations monitoring you. You'd have to be suicidal to carry on in an anti-Semitic fashion. It's crazy. No, maybe some of them, maybe there is anti-Semitic sentiment, but manifest? No. No, I mean, when I'm at Brooklyn College, I'm terrified if anything I say could be misconstrued. But if you're still, if you're in college, you're paying $50,000 a year, do you really want, and more now, 80,000, 90,000, I should say. Do you really want to get expelled for saying something like that and ruining your record for life? Nobody's going to do it. It was so obvious it had to be fabricated because you'd have to be completely suicidal to say something that can be construed as anti-Semitic. So it never happened. Garber said a great deal. I would say 99% was just about Israel.
So I would agree with you. I want to discuss a little bit about how this has impacted freedom of speech on college campuses, and not even just only on the issue of Israel-Palestine. We have had multiple international students at our university be deported for their activism here. How do you think college students in this current moment can fight for their freedom of speech?
Well, there are several aspects to that, and I'll try to separate out the strands. First of all, there was already a real problem with freedom of speech on college campuses before Trump and before Biden. It was the whole wokeness phenomenon, that pathological deviation called wokeness. What it did was it completely undercut basic principles of freedom of speech. They created a new standard. We have a standard in our country, and as a legal standard, it's actually quite impressive. Unless you're advocating in the most direct way, not indirectly, but in the most direct way you're advocating violence, you have the right to say what you want. I mean, our country is very impressive in that way. My parents would probably smack me for singing praises to the United States. They were very anti-US. But facts are facts. In our country, you can burn the American flag, protected by our Constitution, as determined by the Supreme Court. In our country, you can advocate the violent overthrow of the government, protected by our Supreme Court. In our country, there was a court case where somebody walks into a courthouse, emblazoned on his shirt is "fuck the draft." It went to the Supreme Court. They said he has the right to wear it. We have pretty impressive free speech laws. But then I'm not saying they were always practically implemented. That would not be an accurate depiction. But nonetheless, they were there. And then along came wokeness, and they created a new standard that you're allowed to repress speech that made any particular group feel unwelcome, unsafe, or uncomfortable. And that became the new standard. And I wrote a book on the subject, and I said in the book, be careful what you wish for, because it's only a matter of time between Jewish supporters of Israel are going to invoke that standard and say, this Palestinian speaker makes me feel unsafe, unwelcome, and uncomfortable. Be careful what you wish for. And shortly after, that's what happened with Gaza. What was the argument against the encampments? They made Jewish students feel unsafe, unwelcome, and uncomfortable. They simply appropriated the woke language, and the whole thing boomeranged. It was completely forgotten, all the discussion, what our tradition of freedom of speech is. Because once you had internalized the woke standard, you had nothing left to fight back with. If you're using that standard, they win. Supporters of Palestinians were totally disarmed ideologically and politically. They were disarmed. How do you fight back? Because we use that standard, meaning the supporters of the Palestinians, we use the standards of unsafe, unwelcome, and uncomfortable. Nobody could be able to say, I don't care if you feel uncomfortable. Freedom of speech protects my right to make you feel uncomfortable. I don't care if you feel unwelcome. You couldn't say it. So there was already a problem prior to the encampments because people were ideologically disarmed by the wokeness standard, which was a complete disaster. It completely boomeranged, but it boomeranged in a much bigger way. You know why? Most of the woke people didn't have a dime in their pocket. They were poor. Most of them. I don't mean high woke, who were literally raking in millions and millions and millions. You know, the Angela Davis, Ibram X. Kendi, Robin DiAngelo, and all of them. It was big business. But for most people on the college campus, it was, mostly minorities on scholarship. Parents aren't particularly wealthy, and maybe not wealthy at all. But what happens? The other side, their parents have big bucks, and their community is very rich. So when they start using the woke standard, unsafe, unwelcome, uncomfortable, the Jewish supremacist billionaires enter. Jewish students are feeling unsafe. You have to crush the encampment. And if you don't, we're withdrawing our alumni contributions or suspending them. And that was big money. Big money. The Harvard report mentions one of the critics of the encampment. He gave Harvard that year $200 million. Another gave Harvard $300 million. So the original woke people, not particularly rich. They were mostly the minority students on college campuses who are there on scholarship and whose parents are first generation, second generation. But the other side, they had the wokeness argument and they had the money. So it turned into a royal disaster. But the root of the disaster, now I'm not saying the Palestine side would have won if they had adhered from the beginning to free speech principles. It's hard to say whether they would have won. But you didn't have to hand it to the other side as a silver platter by invoking this completely bogus standard of unsafe, unwelcome, and uncomfortable. So you lost from the get-go. There was no way to answer. Even now, when I spoke to you on the way up, and the issue of the encampments, which we discussed, it came up, you constantly said the Jewish students were saying they felt unsafe, unwelcome. That would have been unthinkable in my era. Too bad if you feel unwelcome. That's too bad. And by the way, the woke people, the standard was completely hypocritical. Because if you're a Christian, and let's say in my classes I teach in a public university, I have many students who are from Latin America. They're Catholic and they're deep believers. They think abortion is murder. Okay? They're uncomfortable hearing about abortion. Does that prevent woke people from talking about it? Not really. Not really. It was only if we feel uncomfortable. If you start applying the uncomfortable standard, education just falls apart. At least in the humanities, I'm not talking about the natural sciences. Most people don't feel uncomfortable by, whether E equals MC squared. That's they don't feel uncomfortable. So it was a disaster. The second thing that has to be said is Trump exploited the anti-Semitism issue to go after wokeness in general. And because wokeness was so completely bankrupt, it was an easy target. As I say with Tucker Carlson, a lot of what he says is true. And a lot of what people said about wokeness on college campuses, how stifling it was, how suffocating it was true. So Trump had a very easy target there. Now, of course, he expanded it and wanted to get rid of all African American studies and rewrite American history as it was in the 1950s and so on and so forth. But there were elements, a large number of elements, that were true. So he expanded the target, using the anti-Semitism. It started with the anti-Semitism, and then it went to all of these leftist studies programs. That's a new problem. But I don't think we should revert back to where we were or to fight for that. Thankfully, it's pretty much over. You know, when I wrote the book, I'll burn that bridge when I get to it, I lost around 10 people who I were close to, including two publishers who I had published with previously. Now when you read the book, it doesn't even raise an eyebrow. It doesn't, because it was so ridiculous that what was being said back then. That people just write to me, they find the book hysterical. Because what was being said was just such complete nonsense. It was intellectually vacuous. And most of the members of high wokeness, they're gone. That problem has, in my opinion, diminished significantly, almost to the point of zero, approaching zero. And now, you know, the problem of Trump expanding the target, but the core still remains the anti-Semitism. I mean, still at the University of Pennsylvania now, and several other universities, they're still harping. Because these people, they're Jewish supremacists, and they still think they can bring back American public opinion to what it was before October 8th, 2023. They still think they can't. You know why they can't? Because Israel is a completely lunatic country. You can't control them. They are still hoping that maybe Israel will become semi-normal, and then we could still sell the product. No. That place is over the cliff. A completely lunatic state. I take that back. A completely lunatic society. It's not a problem of the state. It's a problem of the society. It's a completely lunatic society. Completely off the charts. They still think that, you know, putting more pressure on the universities, cutting out any pro-Palestinian courses, what they call pro-Palestinian courses, you know, they still think they can restore the status quo ante. I find that implausible. They could, if Israel would carry on like a normal country and everyone will forget what happened. Memories are short, news cycle shifts quickly. It could have happened, but not with that country. There's so much bloodlust in that country. So much just pure, distilled, pristine racism. They can't control themselves.
Thank you, Norman Finkelstein. That'll bring us to the end of our interview.
Thank you.
And thank you, everyone, for watching. Take care.